Hey everyone, what's going on? Welcome to the latest episode of the Genesis Cloud Community's Q&A show, the show where we answer your pressing questions from the Genesis online community. My name is Matt Lawson. I'm your online community manager. And today we're going to be talking with Angelo. You all probably do not know who Angelo is, and that's okay. You're going to get to meet him shortly. He works behind the scenes at Genesis to make sure we are using the same tools, tips, tricks, and features that you all are. Angelo is going to do a much better job of talking about it than I am. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and welcome Angelo to the show. Hey, Angelo, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Matt?
Good, doing well. I've known you for a few years. We actually got to enjoy Las Vegas together. We've done a couple of other trips, but it's the first time you've been on the show. I'm really excited to have you. I know you, unfortunately, a little bit better than some of our audience members. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure can. I'm Angelo Arezzi. I'm the Senior Director of Support Services here at Genesys. So my team leads all of the initiatives around putting our internal tools to use with our engineers, mostly on the Genesys platform, but also on integrated third-party applications as well. And our goal is to really be customer zero for Genesys, really live as a customer and give that feedback back to our product team, as well as be able to show what does the right implementation look like of Genesys Cloud.
That's awesome. And a little bit of background for our audience. I know what Angelo is going to be talking about because it was a huge initiative inside of Genesis. And that's why we're excited to have this presentation because we've been through what a lot of you have been or are going through, which is bringing Genesis to life in your call centers and across your various channels. But to kind of start the conversation, I was curious, Angelo, as this project was coming forward, did you have any big reservations, anything you were particularly like, you know, uh, thinking through, anything that was on your mind or at the forefront of your mind?
Yeah, so there were a couple of things. When you think about AI and the use of a cloud platform, right? It's a little daunting. You start to think about all of the things and try to put together this huge comprehensive plan. And that was probably the largest thing that really kept us from getting started. And then we sort of, and I'll go through this in a little bit, but we just started thinking about how do we take the smallest task and start moving forward with it, right? And that's what I find most people say is the hard thing.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait to see your presentation. I'm really excited. What I'd like to do is get out of your way. I may ask questions as you go through it, but if you're ready to start the presentation, I'm definitely ready to watch and learn.
Sure. Today, I'll be walking you through how we navigated AI, being agile, adopting, and how we did it here at Genesys. Now, I'll be honest, it took a span of several years for us really to do the full adoption. When we look at it, again, I'm going to bring you through our journey. I'm going to talk through the importance of using use cases and how to be agile versus doing stop and go project management. And then also, how do you drive adoption? That's a big one that we struggled with, and I think most companies do. But first and foremost, I want to explain who is Genesys Support, right? So we have 450 people dispersed across the globe. We're a remote organization, so we have a few major offices in certain locations. We're experts in all things Genesys. So any one of the products, but primarily our flagship Genesys Cloud product, and also some third-party integrations. We use Genesys Cloud for almost everything. Again, we have some third-party applications that we use just like most companies, but interaction and work automation, so the routing and really how do we disperse our work. WEM, so that's from forecasting all the way to capacity planning as well as quality intelligence. And then company-wide communications. We use our Genesys Collaborate tool for that. Our focus is really on how do we create processes with the customer in mind? How do we make sure that it's not only good for us internally, but also on the other side of that? So we do a lot of different, focus groups and testing when we put out a new process. How do we shift to an AI-driven workflow? So that's going to be a constant, I think, on everyone's mind. AI is all the rage. It's moving fast, and it's really something that a lot of companies have to think about. And then our final thing is focusing on skills training for our folks. So while the technology and the tools can be great, but how do we make sure that our team is really focused on being experts in the product, as I mentioned? As I jump in, I kind of mentioned this earlier, right? You really just have to take the first step. When you start your journey, especially when you're talking about AI, everyone wants to try to solve every problem. You want to try to come up with this complex initiative. And really, it starts with that first step, being very simple and deliberate in what you do. And I really have three things that I'm going to go over today on how we do it. First and foremost, you need to look at your use cases. If you're just saying, I want AI to do all this stuff, or I want this cloud platform to do all the stuff, you're generally not going to get the result you want. So when you look at it, I tend to break it down into three buckets under the use cases. You're going to have small tasks, which you might say, hey, this is going to accentuate what my humans need to do, right? What my engineers, my agents, whatever they're called in your particular organization, you will actually be able to start to think about how do I make it so they can do things faster? This might be, for instance, in the Genesys world, we're working on an intake process that will allow us to get the right information. You may also have something where you're saying, hey, if I do these four things in the platform, or I have AI do some things ahead of time, it will help the person on the other end to do the thing faster that they need to do. So we're never going to be in a world where human interactions are completely gone. The goal is you make it so the more complex things have to come through. So looking at small tasks first, that's going to be easy because you can start to really peel those off and start to work on those. Larger tasks, these are the ones where you're saying, hey, I might deflect some of the interactions to my people. I might be able to have a customer do a self-service flow. I might be able to put some things in front of the customer that help them. But ultimately, these ones are going to be larger. They're probably going to touch more systems. They're going to be a little bit more complex in scope. And then when we think about the more complex tasks, these are going to be things that span multiple systems. They potentially have a lot of different steps that you have to go through. They may even touch multiple people today in your world. And when you're thinking about how do I move them to the cloud, or how do I, use AI for them, you're really coming up with a massive project for these ones. These are the ones that are going to be huge in scope. And when I look at it, I start to look at how do I make sure that I'm getting value? Now, if you are like where we were at in Genesys maybe a year or 2 years ago, where we didn't have a lot of things automated and we didn't have a lot of things in the cloud, you might be thinking the best way to go about this is get approval for a very large plan for AI or for a technology system, and to really have all of that mapped out and have the perfect system. I will give you an example of how we took care of this with our knowledge management. But in essence, you probably want to go the other way. You want to start with small things. Now, you may still need to be in a position where you get approval for a technology platform, but going after the small things will help you get started quickly. They will help you start to realize value. And those are the use cases that will probably most help your people today. When you're talking about the things as you go down the list here, they get more complex, and your adoption is going to be less and less if you haven't taken the steps, the smaller steps towards it. So this is a pretty big area, use cases. I'll talk about next defining the actual cases themselves, but this is one area that I think most people tend to try to jump to the biggest thing, and they also try to take a lot of time doing this. You really don't have to if you start with the smaller ones. The next thing that I like to look at is, okay, let's define the workflow. It's easy to come up with a use case, but in many cases, the reality of what's actually being done versus what you might have down on paper are different. So most systems today have the APIs and the connections to really make all of this automation work, make AI to be able to communicate, but our imagination is really the limits of our ideas. And when I look at this, I like to start with, let's put the workflow down on paper if it isn't already. If it is, you got to step ahead, right? So you're a little bit ahead of the game. Then I like to start to really look at where do the actual humans, where do they fit? What steps are they actually doing? I will tell you, most folks that work in contact centers, most folks that work in any line of business, you tend to have a process that you have on paper, and then you have what's being done in reality. And that's because in many cases, the technology might not quite fit what the person needs to do. Or there may be a more efficient way that they found to do it. You might have someone who's using a notepad or doing something in their system that's a little different than the exact workflow. It's always good to get the reality of the situation, and then start to note all of the various systems that you might be interacting with, right? So being able to tell that I'm using this particular CRM over here, or this note-taking application here, that's going to allow you to really have the complete picture end to end. And then the final step, which most times people tend to forget, is taking time studies. So while you have this mapped out, while you're doing this research, you should take a stopwatch. You can do it on your phone. There are some applications that do this, but you really want to understand what does the full workflow take and what does each step take? And the reason for that is it will allow you, one, to document the details of how long it's taking today and what the impact of the new system will be. So that creates your business case right there. And we'll talk about that in a second. But you also want to be able to monitor what is the end result after you put the new process in place, whether it's a full, really complex task or it's something small. You want to make sure that the end result is you get what you believe you were going to get when you started. And the only way to do that is to map it out and do a time study. So really the end-to-end mapping of the workflows is crucial to this process. And the reason I really emphasize that is because I have seen, in my experience, I've done it as well. I have seen where you start out, you have an idea, you start working through it, and then you find out the reality of what people were doing in the process on paper wasn't the same. So you don't get the impact you were thinking. And also, you might actually implement a process and have low adoption, or potentially it doesn't work the way you believed it was going to. And you're doing a lot of work, you're doing a lot of monitoring, and find out that you had to go back somewhere. So doing all this work up front will help to make sure what each step should take and be able to help you later when you might have to pinpoint if there's an adoption issue or potentially that there's an issue in the process that's making things take longer. When you're dealing with technology, that's always a factor, right? No matter how well you plan, how well you put these systems in place, you're always going to see some of those things crop up as you go. The third sort of step that I like to put here is building partnerships. I'll spend a little bit of time here because if you've done your homework on the last two steps, you're going to find that this area is a little bit easier, but there's no way that anyone can go it alone. Even with my group here at Genesys, I have a lot of control over our systems, a lot of control over our process, but there's still need for me to be able to interface with other teams, particularly when we look at it. You want to look at a few different areas, right? So most likely, if you're putting in a foundational AI system, you're going to want to have the data you need. You're going to want to have the access that's required to be able to do some of this, and then the processing power, right? So that's just a given. You need to have the right tools, you need to have the right platform and the data that's powering that. And those are sometimes the easy steps, but you need some partnerships in order to get all of that. So IT or your systems or your development folks, that's where I would spend a large amount of time because these are the groups that are going to help to really drive this. In many cases, when we're talking about AI, these are also the teams that own the AI systems. They own, in many cases, selecting the system, potentially doing the procurement, making sure that you have the right licensing. So you want to make sure you partner with this group. They can also help you to make sure that this process is much more refined, right? Where you sit, you might be able to put things down on paper and really put details into it. But this group is going to be crucial to you being able to make sure that everything talks to each other. The other thing is usually they have a vested interest in you using the technology. So they're going to help you to really make sure that it works seamlessly and that you get the impact that you desire because it not only helps you for the impacts you're talking about, it helps them to make sure that the technology and the platforms that they care and maintain are being used and the value is there. So it's really complete value realization you're going to get by partnering with your IT group. The PMO group, and this may be called something different at your organization. It might be called the project management team. You might just have a person or a set of people that just do this function and they don't really have a name. But really having solid project management and a plan in place will help you to make sure that you're able to go from A to Z quickly, right? And where I think that this is a crucial step is this group can also help to lead you to make that plan. And this is a really good area to focus on as well outside of your IT group.
Real quick, Angelo, because I know at the top you were kind of talking about how you did a lot of stuff. You were working with AI, you were working with WFM. Did you have different project managers for those different kinds of like tasks and projects, or were you working with the same one across all of it?
So as it would happen, we have one leader over the tools group that really helps us to do some of the strategy planning. But then we had different project managers that helped us to really visualize and be able to put that into execution. So it really depends on your company, but you might have where you're interacting with different folks. It's the same with IT. So that's a good question, Matt. You might have different leaders in IT that are over the different systems. So that's why it's really important that you kind of understand your company. And you may have to go on a journey of learning, right? Depending on how large your company is or how spread out their organization might be for IT or project management, it's a good idea to make sure that you're letting everyone in on the secret, right? These are not plans that you should make in a basement and hope to have a big surprise. The only way you're going to be successful is knowing these groups. And that's a really good point. Depending on your company, you might have different folks. I will tell you, as we continue to expand these programs and projects, we most likely will have more centralized teams because we've now got we've cut our teeth on some of these things, and we say, hey, it might be good to have one centralized project manager for AI projects,
Mm.
right? But we use different folks as we were working through just because of the way that that team was set up.
Okay, cool. Perfect. Thank you.
The other team that you really want to get involved is your finance team. Now, some places this might be called strategic finance. It might be called, the business transformation office. You might have some different groups with different names, but you want to find out the folks that are responsible for demonstrating ROI or return on investment in your organization. Because the only way that you're going to be able to get anyone to sign off on a large expenditure for a technology platform or even the resources to put some of these things together is to really be able to put together a solid plan, know that you have the right systems in place, but also have someone who's able to work with the math of the company, right? Each company is a little different in how you do your accounting, how you might actually attribute some of these savings you may get from this point. You might have to where you're not necessarily attributing savings, but you're able to put that towards work that your team could be doing in lieu of these tasks, right? So it's really important to have that team together to where they can help to craft this message for you. Now, once you do that, that's where you've got the right team, you've got the right plan. You really now can start to execute on bringing your executive team in, bringing your stakeholders in. Now, you may have already done this. So at Genesys, I have the luxury of having a company that is really focused on AI, and we've already got some of this working. But if you have to go through and put together a project plan and an executive level presentation to request to go from, nothing to green light, this is where all of these groups will help you as well, right? So if you got the right things working and everything's moving forward with some return on your investment, I generally have never found teams that say, hey, I'm not going to work on that because it doesn't make sense, right? But that is your litmus test as well. As you're going through IT and you're working with your project managers, as you're working with your finance team, these teams will check and balance you along the way so that if for some reason something doesn't make sense, it will help you to refine your project plan or potentially abandon it because it's not going to have enough of that ROI. Before you go and make a big presentation to a whole bunch of executives, you'll at least have the right foundation to be able to start with, and you'll be prepared to make that call. So as I mentioned at the top, you really need to start by making the small steps, but you really just need to start, right? So don't wait for the perfect conditions. And in many cases, you will hear, even from Genesys, it depends on the scenario, right? Depending on what you're looking at from your use case, you might have to do some pre-work. There might have to be some things you bring together. I'm going to walk you through a real example of how we did it here in support. And we didn't necessarily wait for the perfect conditions, but this can be a step where most get stuck, right? Because I'm waiting for the perfect thing to come along. I'm waiting for all of these systems to be joined together, or I'm waiting for some sort of process, or I'm waiting for some other event to happen at my company before I start. And what I can tell you is it really depends on the scenario, but in most cases, if you just start the work and start heading down this path, you'll find you'll get more benefits and you'll find you'll actually be able to work through this with your internal team, and your clients really get the end result, right? They get the benefit of having this start. So just start is my advice. Now, when we want to look at some real world examples, I'm going to walk you through how we did it, and we just started, right? So we actually went through and wanted to put generative AI in our chat. And most companies will tell you, you need to have the right data. You need to make sure that you've got all of your knowledge in the right place. And what we found was we could do it differently. So we stood up live chat, and then we stood up, once we had a good amount of details and data around live chat, about 60 days worth, we started talking about what's the next thing. How can we start to put some generative AI in that chat? Maybe help clients to find their answer without having to speak with a human or open up a case with us. So the use case was simple. We had some siloed knowledge bases. I'll tell you, there's about 14 or 16 of them with Genesys. They all come through in a different look and feel depending on the part of the product you're in. And if we had waited for all of the perfect conditions, meaning all of those centralized into one, which we were working on, we would have never got started with this project. But what we found was AI in some cases can help you short circuit that, right? So we were able to use generative AI and a RAG model to be able to literally pull all of that information from these different sources into one place for the client to be able to use it. So this made sense for us. We were able to start, we were able to jump ahead and not wait for this perfect scenario to happen. And really, our clients got the benefit. So the workflow was simple. Before, they were having to go to all these different areas to get their answer. Now they could come through one area, they could get their answer, and potentially, if they needed to, they could jump off to that location. So we created this centralized place that, again, in thinking about it, we were able to do that in just about 10 days without having to wait for a larger project that might take us 12 to 18 months to centralize all of those. The partnerships we made were our internal development team that helped us to work on building out the generative AI piece and also connecting it to our Genesys system. Our internal IT and systems teams, they really played a part in making sure that we had the right processing power, we had all the right licensing. And then our business process team, they helped us to what you were talking about earlier, Matt. They helped us to make sure we were planning accordingly. And there were a few teams that were involved there at different stages, but this shows you that having the use case, understanding the workflow, and having the right partnerships, that allows you to make sure that you're doing the right things in the right order. And this was valuable to everyone. So it didn't have to wait for those perfect conditions. Another example that I will give you is AI translation. This is another area where, building upon where we had that first use case, we had generative AI now in place. We had the ability to interact with it on our platform. The use case was simple. We have a global company, we have a global team. In many cases, we need to make sure that we're all connecting in the same language. And for our clients, that's especially important. So if you're speaking Portuguese, you don't want to be forced to speak a different language, right? So what we were able to do is actually, rather than going out and sourcing an app and getting something that integrated to our service, because there's many out there, we were able to use what we had just built and build upon that first use case and come up with a second one. How do we make it easy for us to translate back and forth with our clients and also be able to make sure that we can communicate internally where the language barrier existed? The workflow was simple. Each time a case was routed, an engineer had to potentially move that case to somebody else because they didn't speak the language. It caused a lot of moving around. It also made it so that our clients potentially had a delay with their cases. By utilizing AI translation, putting the right plan in place, and building upon what we had, we were able to put this in place quite quickly because, again, most AI systems, most things that you're connecting to, they can do many different things and not have to worry about potentially going and getting another system. Again, the partnerships, a little less this time because we already had the IT partnerships, but our internal development team helped us to connect this use case together. And then our business process team, again, helped us to really roll it out.
Angelo, real quick, you mentioned you used an app that was available in Genesys Cloud. I'm assuming from the App Foundry. Do you want to shout out which app that was real quick?
Actually, this was internal. So
Mm.
while we were able to go out and use any of the App Foundry products or a third party, we were able to, because we already made an integration with an AI platform, we were able to just extend that use case there. But Genesys Cloud does allow those connections. So this is a good example of what I talked about earlier. The open platforms that we have today in our modern world allow us to really connect different things. And because Genesys is that open platform, we could have connected with anything at this point. We just decided we already had the system in place. Let's just extend the use case to that.
Very cool.
So the other thing you have to be when you're talking about system changes, you do have to be agile. You have to be ready for changes, ready to make adjustments, right? So when we talk about adoption, when we talk about other things, you're going to find that being agile is really important. So you need to build that into your plan. A platform like Genesys allows you to do that because as a business user, once you have the connections, you can use the various parts of it like Architect and some of the other flows to really be able to make changes on demand. You don't always have to go to your IT team or development team. It's really maybe minor changes that you might need from those groups, but the power of Genesys allows you to do that, and many other systems are built that same way. When we talk about it, what we mean is really you have to have this approach where you're looking at it from the standpoint of you want to be able to monitor the change, and that's why I talked about it's really important to really understand what the process is today and where you're bringing in. But you want to be able to monitor that change and make course corrections as you need to. When we're talking about AI or even cloud platforms, sometimes you need to launch potentially with an MVP, so minimum viable product. You need to get up and get learning. You need to understand where you need to go from there. You might need to then generate more content. So in our example of using AI to really do translation or potentially even be able to answer clients' questions, we need to launch. Then we needed to generate some more content because as we launched and we saw people interacting, we were able to go in and actually put new content in immediately. So we were able to take those actions right away. And then you need to refine and tune your process. So this really goes for anything, not just generating content. It can go for launching a particular workflow where you have it automating some things for your folks. It can go for any part of the process, but this same sort of loop has to happen. You need to launch, you need to monitor and refine, and then the tuning is really the most important part, especially with AI. It's being able to go in and understand what's being used. Now, I will tell you, one of the things that we used in our example is while we launched AI for our clients, we really walked through the process in such a way that we were able to really do it internally first, make sure we were all comfortable with it, and then launch externally. So that was all within that window that we were talking about earlier. Now, as we look at a real example for Genesys Cloud, I've already kind of talked about it. Our segmented infrastructure for knowledge management is where we turn to Gen AI. So we were able to look at this use case and say, hey, if clients are hitting all those sites, it's really inefficient for them to find an answer. And if I'm a client and I have to jump through a couple of different sites, I'm most likely going to jump right to asking a question of the humans, right? Pick up the phone, open a case. And many companies that I interact with, they're in this same sort of situation. Over time, you might have built different ways for clients to interact with you or get knowledge. You might have old information. You may have some stale content. And what we were able to do is just use off-the-shelf AI tools from Amazon, right? So being able to connect our platform to Amazon and do some different things. We didn't really have to reinvent the wheel. There's some things you can go and just integrate. To your point earlier, Matt, we also have App Foundry partners that do this as well. Being able to connect standard APIs into our LLM and really the AI agents that we built was really important. And using our Genesys orchestration to really define where the experience was. This was crucial. So we put all of the pieces together that you need to in any particular launch, but we were able to do it quickly. We were able to bring about a use case that made sense for the company as well. But the big impact was really when we talk about our clients. So we had a fast launch because we had all of those different teams in play. The big impact to our centralizing of the knowledge content was almost overnight, right? We felt that right away because our clients were able to interact with us, find information, and it also saved a huge amount of effort, right? So being able to do this means we can take a little longer getting the right process for consolidating all of those knowledge management systems, but saving the effort of having to do that right now and get the benefits was huge, right? We can dedicate more time towards other things. It's solving that need for us. So really this demonstrates how you put all three of those steps together, but also you can build off of it. As I mentioned, we went to AI translation after this. We're doing some more use cases. You will, as a client of Genesys, you'll be able to experience this in later releases of our portal and other things that we're going to bring to market. But this also allows us to really drive that maximum effort. What I want to talk about next is adoption, right? So It's one thing to put a new process in place. It's one thing to put new technology on, but you really need to make sense of the change. And in many cases, you just need to dive in and start to figure out what's going to be right for your scenario. But there's generally a couple of things that you can do to really get adoption where you need it. It's not a one size fits all. And where I'll take you is there's a couple of different ways to do this. Some are right, some are wrong. So when we talk about forced adoption, that potentially is the way that you don't want to go, right? This is where you might be dealing with complaints from your internal users or external users because you just cut over and took away something that was not great for them, right? You might sunset some old paths, you might hard code some things in. And the reason I say this is not usually the way you want to go is because unless you've done a lot of research, unless you've done a lot of, customer feedback sessions and really started to understand what they were using about the old process and prepared them ahead of time, forced adoption is usually not the best path to go. But it can be done and it can be done well as long as you're doing a lot of pre-work and you're doing a lot of pre-communication before it happens. I find in many cases, those are the steps that you tend to miss is that communication, and it makes the forced adoption route extremely hard. And it's actually a hard cut that most people react very aggressive towards, for lack of a better term. This is where you might get some feedback from your external customers that they might not like the new way that you're doing things. So you really have to take care if you're doing a forced adoption. The hybrid way keeps some of the old flows in place, and it also introduces the new flows at the same time. So you sort of do this trade-off and you start to figure out when's the right time to sunset old paths. You give the ability for people to beta test or potentially go through the path and give you feedback. You might even go to a few of your clients or a few of your agents and say, we want you to try this for a certain period of time, and then we're going to cut everyone over. But this hybrid approach is usually the best because it allows you to really control the experience without allowing folks to just do whatever they want. And then the last one I call the open world, right? You put this new path in place and you just let people use it if they want to and use the old flow if they don't want to. So this drives adoption by showing some of the value. But where I find that this one really gives you a downside is if this isn't highly controlled and you don't put some end dates on it being open world to where you will do that sort of forced conversion, you're going to have people choose the path that's right for them or that they feel most comfortable with. And that's usually the path they've been using the whole time. So this is where you might find that people are not able to adopt as well. Now, throughout these processes, again, it's not one size fits all. And there's different scenarios where you might put one of these three in place. The other things you want to make sure you're doing is highly communicating with your audience and making sure that you're showing them the value each step of the way. So whether you do a forced or open world or the hybrid mode, you want to make sure you're showing the why behind the changes you're doing. It should be that you're making things better for them. You are going to make a particular workflow easier for them to do, or potentially that this will give them access to better functionality later down the road. But there always has to be the why behind the communication. And I usually recommend, unless you're doing a really small change that's in the background, you should communicate these changes as best you can. And again, that's also going to be not a one size fits all scenario. So adoption is really the hardest point that I want to get through is you really have to figure out what's right for your company. You have to figure out what's right for your team and your customers before you make the change. And this is something that you need to really work through ahead of time before you're ready to make that cutover. So make this a part of your project planning. Make this something that you do a lot of investigation into. But adoption is probably outside of just connecting the technology together. It's one of the hardest things that you have to do when you're putting in new technology or new workflows because there's so many things that could go wrong outside of just putting the platform in place and having errors pop up that you really need to take care of with adoption.
One of the things, as you were talking about that, I mean, change management is a field that's really exploding right now.
Yes.
And with the project like you're talking about, the communication isn't just with your customers, but it's also internal to make sure people understand what the new processes are, is everything working? Are they getting the notifications that they need to respond in the proper ways? Talk a little bit about that. You talked about your project management team. Did you have a change management team that you worked with? Who was doing, was there a separate team for like the internal communication versus the customer communication?
So yes and no. I'll tell you the reality of it. When we first started this and started going through this journey, in some cases we were turning features on and we were not really fully explaining it. We had to learn by trial and error, right? So part of why our implementation process is so good is we've learned the right way to put things, to turn things on and implement things, and then have folks adopt them. But we learned the hard way, right? We had to go in and figure out what was the right way to introduce some of these things. What's the right secret sauce of adoption? It's going to be different. A larger item like going through and launching AI translation with our teams, that took a lot of internal communication, right? On
Mhm.
the external side for our clients, we found that that was easier, right? Being able to tell them, hey, we are using translation services, or someone's not available for that particular language right now, but if you want to use our translation service, go through these steps and you'll work with an expert, but it will use the translation. That was easier, right? On the external side, clients just kind of understood that, being transparent with them allowed them to see it. But on the internal side, it took a lot of adoption driving, because there's so many different ways that someone could make it easier for themselves to just move a case along, or get to somebody else. So we had to show all the whys behind that. What were the big impacts for them? Why were we asking them to do a couple more steps? On other projects, like as we launch new features within our platform, that takes a lot of communications on both sides. So it really depends on the situation. I will tell you, it's good if you're a smaller company, you don't have the ability to have communications teams like we have. It's good to maybe make someone that communication czar, who you would say, hey, you're the best person that we have right now to be able to write the internal or the external. So we're going to give you this as a function. So you really want to give some ownership to someone to do that, because if you don't, you will miss that along the way.
Very cool. Yeah, solid advice. And like you said, at a larger company, the difference can be, you have more people that you need to figure out how to communicate to. And
Yes.
you said at Genesis, we've got a lot of channels out there. You're only talking about 14. I'm glad we're only admitting to 14 on this episode. We have a lot more than that. But go ahead, Angelo.
That's actually the journey that I wanted to bring everyone on, in terms of bringing you through all the way from thinking about the use cases now all the way through to adoption. This is a process. And if you work
Mhm.
the process in each and every case, you will be successful. But just how much work you need to do at each step, that really depends on the scenario. I say start small, get those first steps underneath you, really get those first couple of wins, and it makes it easier for you to get the bigger wins. We all want to go after the big fish, and that big trophy, but it's usually a better case to say, step back, take your time. And in this case, we were able to do some things that frankly might be against conventional wisdom. I gave you the example of the knowledge base earlier. We just went right for it at that point and said, this will help us to centralize, and we don't have to wait for perfect. Let's just do it. Right. And in many cases, you might be sitting down and saying, I do have to wait for an event before I do something. I have to wait for some action to happen. That's why you start small. That's why you start building plans. And you may want to come up with a full strategy that says, here's my next 12 to 18 months. Or you might be in a different situation where you have to take a chunk at a time. Really depends on the situation. But following this process all the way through will make you successful, whether it's a big one or a small one.
Cool. So just to clarify, is this the end of your presentation or do you have a little more?
This is the end.
Oh no. Okay. So well then I've got to ask. You keep talking about ROI, and you keep talking about how long you've been in this project. So just real quick, can you kind of give me the timeline of when did this project start to now?
Yeah, so we started our overall AI journey, cloud journey, several years ago. So I,
Mhm.
I would say probably around 2023 is when we started to look at our platform and ecosystem and said, okay, we've got to start somewhere. So foundationally, we got all of the pieces of Genesis Cloud implemented. So our standard parts of the platform where we're routing cases, we're routing interactions and chats and live customer calls, that took us about 6 to 8 months just like a normal implementation, right? We weren't able to go any faster than our customers normally do. Now, I'll tell you, it's gotten much faster after that. We had to unwind a lot of things. If you're going on Genesys Cloud, you could be up and running sometimes in 6 to 8 weeks or faster, right? But we had a lot of legacy tech debt that we did have to address before we could move over.
Hmm.
When we start talking about the AI part of the journey, that's been the last year of us really working through a systematic plan where we started with live chat and Gen AI, and then we started to bring in AI translation. We're moving forward with some of the things that our clients, frankly, can and will use inside of Genesys Cloud, like Copilot. Those are things that we're standing up now and converting over to. So I'll
Cool.
tell you, it's been a longer journey as we've put this whole thing into play. But over time, we've gotten faster at being able to do things. We're able to really engage all of those muscles of change management at all times and get faster at seeing impacts. It really depends. If you're making your AI journey right now or starting to switch over to cloud, you might see this taking a little bit longer, and don't get frustrated. It's going to be different by each company. As Matt kind of called out earlier, you might have a larger company where you can put a lot of resources in play. You might have a smaller company, you only can do a piece at a time. So the timing wise is going to be different. Your ROI is going to be different. We also looked at it from a standpoint of there's some intangibles to your ROI. Sometimes you have to say, we just have to do this because it will make it so we can build upon that later. That first step for us in getting onto Genesys Cloud from our premise environment was just that. We had to say, listen, we have to transition to the cloud just like we're letting our customers know. There's a lot of ROIs behind that, but internally for us, our ROI was just on the ability to have a completely remote workforce and start to build upon the foundation to do AI later.
Okay, cool. Well, one of the questions I had as you were going through your slides is you did talk about ticket deflection. And obviously, sitting in the online community, deflection is a big thing that I get asked a lot about in terms of leadership. With your metrics in general, everything from deflection to ROI, any kind of like lessons you've learned there of how you collect, present, information to your higher ups?
Yeah, so deflection is always an odd one, right? So you need to make sure, and that's why one of the steps that I presented was make sure you know your workflow and the expected impact that you will have. Because if you go and make a presentation and say, I'm going to deflect all of this volume or all this work from my team, one, you need to be able to state that. What is that going to be? How are you going to measure that? Now, I will tell you, again, in my experience, sometimes there can be missteps there. So it's important to be very clear on what you're trying to accomplish. And then as you start to really focus on giving status updates or claiming a victory in terms of what you've done, you need to be able to go back and actually show that. What tends to happen, especially when you're talking about deflection of work, you will tend to have a lot of teams that want to take credit for that. So that's why
No
it's really
way.
extremely important, one, that you socialize what you're doing, two, that you track and monitor, and you know the type of reporting you're going to do. Because in many cases, your customer experience might get better, and your product team may come in and say, hey, we made a better product, right? Marketing, your sales might go up, and your marketing team is going to say, we started doing better marketing, right? And that's all true. But as long as you can start to really show and share the success of what you're doing and you can report on it, then you can make sure that you can take credit for the full impact that you're having. Not doing that, just putting a change in and just kind of rolling through it. Sometimes we want to do that part and not do the extra reporting monitoring part. That can tend to have adverse effects because other folks will see changes in what they're doing as a result, but they may not actually know that it's coming from you, right? Or the things that you've done. So it's really important, that step.
Cool. Well, I guess, I mean, you've already mentioned you're going to be dabbling with Copilot or that's in progress now or process now. What else is coming up? Journey management? Like what are the next like small, big, and overwhelming projects that are on your plate?
Yeah, so for us here in product support, Copilot is the big one, right? That's being able to really set that foundation of having all of that great knowledge that we have in all those different places come into our engineer and be able to have it pop on the screen as they're working with you as a client. That's really crucial because it allows us to start to drive down some of our normal training time, right? We do a lot of training on a lot of different systems, and having Copilot be able to present to us is the big one. But the other big piece that we get out of that is really how do we set up next best action off of that, right? Copilot has that built in. So being able to have the system present what the next thing is you should be doing and clicking a button and having it go do that in those systems will be the biggest, leap forward in us being able to deliver faster, right? And be able to deliver a consistent experience. So that's the big one. We are introducing some journey management capabilities, so we'll be able to personalize some things as you come through and you interact with support. Part of that's our new intake process. So being able to really, as you're coming through and telling us what you need help with, we may be able to do some self-service flows off of that. So our virtual agents come into play there, but that's really, again, being able to connect all of these technologies together through the open platform will allow us to really figure out what's the next best action we can do both on our client side as you're doing intake. I will tell you the one thing that we are very conscious of though is we want to make it so that these accentuate the journey and don't block you from doing things. So I call it the GPS, right? When you go through and you're trying to plan your journey from one point to another, you might have 4 or 5 routes. We're going to help you find the most efficient one. But if you decide you want to take the scenic route, we're there for you, right? We're not going to block you from doing that. And that's sometimes also where companies will take this AI and take this ability to deflect, and they'll put some barriers up and say, you're only going to take one route. That's not necessarily the best thing to do, especially when you're supporting a client. You want to be able to guide them through the most efficient route, but not block them.
One more question I had, and this is kind of a fun one, just because of, the work I do in the community. A lot of the times the questions that we get asked are along kind of like, what have you had to change in terms of your day to day? Because now that you're working with Genesys and using the system, how are you keeping up with education from like the new features that are coming out? Are you more excited this year to go to experience as an observer so that you can learn about some of the features that are coming out, or are you going to be there as a presenter and observer? Like, yeah, just tell me a little bit about how your relationship with Genesis has shifted now that you're managing this.
Yeah, so I'll tell you a couple of things. One, I get the benefit of sitting within Genesys itself. So sometimes I hear about things before they actually come out to our clients. So that's always a great thing because I get to hear these things. I sometimes get to have my team try them and put them in play and give that feedback. But I generally like to pay attention to a few places. So I love seeing the community and where people ask those questions and how our product team interacts in there. So I shout out to the community. It's a great place to get that information. Our resource center is also another great place to keep up on our launches. If you look at our AHA dashboard, right? So our product ideas come through that system. So I like to be in those 3 different places from a standpoint of being able to learn about new things. Experience is a great way to do that because you'll get to see it in action. You'll get to interact with other clients and see how they might use things. So really the networking there is crucial in being able to see it live. But I always like to also look at whatever webinars we might have coming out. So there's so much ways to get content from Genesys, but those are maybe the 4 or 5 spots that I pay attention to. In addition, I get a little bit of an early peek sometimes behind the curtain. But the excitement for us is really some of the new things that we're coming out with in regards to AI and how you can really enhance the workflow that you have for a client. The new supervisor AI is also a big one. I didn't mention it earlier, but we are heavily using that within Genesys to be able to monitor more communications, right? It allows you to do that, but also use that to drive our coaching. So those are some pretty big areas that we're focused on right now.
That's really cool. Well, Angela, one thing I love about you, we got to work on this episode together, which is really cool. But outside of that, you're always really quick to get back to me if I have a question or anything. And I wouldn't be surprised if some community members do. So if you're watching this episode and you have a question for Angelo, please let me know. You can let us know on YouTube or in the community where we post this episode. Just let us know. Angelo is always happy to kind of walk people through this. He's been where you are, setting up Genesys, evolving Genesys. So I'm sure he'd love to hear from you. And as you keep using tools, if you're interested, come back. We'd love to hear more about the steps you've taken with all the great stuff you're doing.
Oh, I definitely will. And I appreciate the time to be able to share with you all today.
No, thank you. And I guess if I don't see you sooner, I will see you at Experience in September.
Perfect.
All right, awesome. Thanks for stopping by.
Thanks, Matt.
All right. Thank you again, Angelo, for stopping by, and thank you all for checking out this week's episode. The next time you see me, it'll be the last time we record for Experience. So hopefully, we'll get to dive a little bit more into what you can expect from that wonderful conference if you can attend in Tennessee, where I will be, and hopefully you too. That does it for me. Hope you are well. Hope to see you in the community. And I'll be back in a couple of weeks with another episode. Have a good one, everybody.